I still remember the exact moment I saw it, the locked door. It was tucked away in a corner of my new office, almost hidden, like it didn't want anyone to notice it. But I did. And that was the start of everything that went wrong. When I first moved into the office, I thought it was perfect. Quiet, a little old but charming in a way only buildings with a lot of history can be. I was ready to settle in, start my new job, and maybe even make this place feel like home. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed that door. It wasn't like any other door in the building. It was heavy, made of dark wood, and the paint was chipped in all the right places to make it look almost ancient. What caught my attention was the lock, an old-fashioned, rusty padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The thing is, no one told me about it. No one mentioned there was a locked room in the office. I asked around, casually at first, but every time I brought it up, people got uncomfortable or changed the subject. My curiosity only grew stronger. Why was that door locked? What could be behind it? I started imagining all sorts of things. Maybe it was just storage, a forgotten closet filled with old office supplies. But then, why the padlock? Why not just use a key or keep it unlocked like every other room? It felt like the door was hiding something, and that something wasn't supposed to be found. That's when the weird stuff started. At first, it was just little things. Strange noises when I walked past the door late at night, soft creaks, whispers, almost like someone breathing on the other side. The air felt colder near the door, too, like stepping into a different room that wasn't part of our world. I thought I was imagining it, or maybe it was just old pipes or the building settling. But every time I tried to ignore it, the feeling grew stronger, like the door was calling me, daring me to open it. I won't lie, I was scared. But the fear mixed with this strange fascination. What if behind that door was something I wasn't ready to face? Or worse, what if it was something I didn't want to face but had no choice? I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I noticed. Every sound, every odd shadow, every moment the door seemed to shift or move when I wasn't looking. It felt like I was walking deeper into a mystery I might never escape. So, why am I telling you all this? Because what happened after I finally decided to unlock that door changed everything. It wasn't just an old room filled with forgotten things. It was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in the light of day. This is my story. The story of the locked door in my new office, and what I found when I finally opened it. The days after spotting that locked door, I found myself drawn to it almost every time I entered the office. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was an obsession. I'd catch myself standing there, staring at the rough surface of the wood, tracing the rusted padlock with my eyes, wondering what was on the other side. The door was oddly out of place. Everything else in the office had that familiar, predictable vibe of an old but functional workspace. Desks neatly arranged, computers humming, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. But the door. It seemed like a relic from another time. I touched the cold metal of the padlock once, it was heavier than it looked, and the rust crumbled slightly under my fingers. It hadn't been opened in years, if ever. I started asking around more seriously. I mentioned the door to my coworkers, hoping someone would shed some light. But their reactions were strange, some gave vague answers, others laughed nervously and quickly changed the subject. One of the janitors told me to leave it alone, with a tone that wasn't quite a joke. Another coworker whispered about weird noises at night but quickly shut up when I pressed for details. No one wanted to talk about it, which only made me want to find out more. One evening, after everyone else had left, I stayed behind, determined to figure out what was going on. The office was silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light, but my eyes kept drifting to that locked door. I could feel the air getting colder near it, almost like a chill that crept up my spine. I circled the door slowly, trying to listen for anything unusual. Then, I heard it, a faint scratching noise. Like nails scraping against wood. I froze. The sound stopped immediately. My heart pounded, but I convinced myself it was just the building settling again. Or maybe an animal trapped somewhere. I wasn't so sure. The next day, I brought a flashlight and a small toolkit. I wasn't planning to break in, at least, not yet, but I wanted to inspect the door more closely. The door frame was scratched up around the edges, as if someone had tried to force it open before. But the lock was solid, old, and completely rusted shut. It wasn't going anywhere without a key or some serious effort. Still, I ran my hand along the door's surface and felt something strange, almost like a vibration beneath the wood, subtle but real. It sent a shiver down my arm. Over the next few days, I started to notice other odd things near the door. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, but when I turned, there was nothing there. Objects in the room seemed to shift slightly, like they'd been moved, but no one else was around. One morning, I found tiny scratch marks on the floor near the door, like someone or something had been trying to claw its way out. The marks weren't there the night before. I showed them to a coworker, but he just shrugged it off, telling me the building was old and weird stuff happened all the time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was alive behind that door. Something watching. Then came the noises. Not just the scratching, but whispers. Faint voices, barely audible, echoing in the silence. Sometimes they sounded like words, sometimes just indecipherable murmurs. I'd stand there, frozen, trying to catch what they were saying, but it was impossible. I started recording audio on my phone during the quiet hours. When I played it back, I could hear faint, distant voices, too soft to make out clearly, but definitely there. By this point, I was sleep-deprived, anxious, and completely obsessed with that locked door. I couldn't focus on my work, couldn't stop thinking about what was inside. Every time I passed the door, my skin prickled, and my heart rate sped up. One afternoon, I even asked the building manager about it. She was hesitant, avoiding eye contact, and said the room had been sealed off years ago. "It's better left that way," she said, but refused to explain why. That only made things worse. I started digging into the building's history. Online archives, old newspapers, even local forums. I found mentions of the building being used as something else decades ago, a mental institution, a warehouse, stories about strange disappearances. Nothing official, but enough rumors to make me question everything. There was one story that stuck with me, a rumor about a patient or worker who disappeared without explanation. Some said they were locked away in that very room and never seen again. Others whispered about experiments or something darker. Whether true or not, it fed the growing fear inside me. I became hyper-aware of every sound, every flicker of light near that door. Sometimes, late at night when the office was empty, I thought I saw a figure behind the frosted glass panel near the top of the door, a shadowy shape, just barely visible. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I hoped it was. But the feeling of being watched never left. After that conversation with the building manager, I knew I had to dig deeper. Whatever was behind that locked door, it wasn't just some forgotten storage space. The way she looked at me, the way she avoided my questions, it was like she was hiding something. Or maybe scared herself. So, I started hunting for answers wherever I could find them. First, I visited the local library. It was a small, dusty place that smelled of old paper and secrets. I spent hours sifting through newspapers, city records, anything that might mention the building's past. And that's when I stumbled across it, an article from nearly 50 years ago about a mental hospital that used to operate in that area, long before the building was repurposed into offices. The article didn't name the building directly, but the description matched the address perfectly. According to the report, several patients had gone missing under mysterious circumstances, some disappeared without a trace, while others were rumored to have been locked away in parts of the hospital that no one ever entered again. It was the first real clue I'd found, but it raised more questions than answers. Why would an office building have a locked door that dates back to a mental hospital? And why was it still sealed shut all these years later? I started looking for people who might remember the hospital or the building's transition. Online forums and Reddit threads became my new source of information. I posted questions late into the night, hoping someone with first-hand knowledge would respond. To my surprise, I got a few replies. One user claimed to be a former employee who worked there during the office conversion. He said the door led to a sealed-off wing of the hospital that no one wanted to talk about. According to him, strange things happened around that area, unexplainable noises, shadows, and sometimes, people just refused to enter. Another commenter mentioned hearing about secret experiments conducted on patients in that wing, things the public was never meant to know. The stories were vague, but chilling. Every thread I read seemed to add another layer to the mystery. The deeper I went, the more the fear settled in. I was no longer just curious. I was obsessed, and I couldn't stop myself. At work, I started noticing subtle changes in my own behavior. I'd jump at every little sound, and sometimes, I felt like I wasn't alone, even when the office was empty. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up more than once as I walked past that door. One night, while scrolling through old archives, I came across a blueprint scan of the building. It showed a hidden section behind the locked door, a series of small rooms, corridors, and what looked like a basement level. The whole area was crossed out with big red X's and marked restricted. My heart raced. What had they been trying to hide all these years? The next day, I tried asking the janitor again, hoping for more details. This time, he was reluctant but gave me a warning I wouldn't forget. Some doors stay locked for a reason. You don't want to open that one. Trust me. But the more people told me to stop, the harder it became. The locked door had me in its grip. I was chasing shadows, and it was taking over my mind. Then, strange things started happening outside of work. I'd get strange calls, no one on the other end, just static and faint breathing. My phone would light up with messages from unknown numbers, filled with cryptic warnings like, "Turn back," and "Don't open it." Even my dreams became haunted by that door. Night after night, I'd find myself standing in front of it, the lock clicking open on its own. Behind the door, darkness stretched endlessly, and whispers echoed, calling my name. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, but still unable to shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. My friends started noticing my changes, asking if I was okay. But I couldn't explain it. How do you tell people you're terrified of a door? They'd laugh it off, and maybe I'd even laugh too. But inside, I was unraveling. I knew the time was coming when I'd have to make a choice, keep running from the unknown, or face it head-on. And that's when I decided to try opening the door. The decision to open the locked door wasn't sudden. It crept up on me, like a storm building quietly on the horizon. After days of restless nights and relentless obsession, I knew I had to confront whatever was behind that door, or risk losing myself to the fear and uncertainty. I came prepared. I brought with me a crowbar, a flashlight, and my phone for recording. The office was empty, silent except for the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. My heart was pounding as I stood in front of that door, the rusty padlock mocking me with its stubborn grip. I tried to pick the lock at first, but it was hopeless. Years of rust and neglect had fused it shut. The crowbar was my last option. With a deep breath, I wedged the metal bar between the door and the frame, using all the strength I had. The wood creaked and groaned, and for a moment, I thought I might give up. But then, with a sharp snap, the lock broke free, clattering to the floor. The door swung open with a low, heavy groan, revealing darkness. Pitch black. My flashlight cut through the shadows, but the beam barely reached more than a few feet inside. What I saw, or didn't see, sent chills down my spine. The room beyond was small, cramped, and empty. The walls were stained with peeling paint, and the air smelled damp and heavy. But what caught my attention was the floor, a thick layer of dust, except for one narrow path that looked recently disturbed, like someone had been pacing back and forth. My footsteps echoed loudly as I stepped inside, the beam of my flashlight searching for clues. There were no windows, no furniture, just that eerie emptiness. Then, I noticed something on the far wall, a series of crude symbols, scratched into the paint. They looked ancient, twisted, and unfamiliar. I crouched down to examine them, feeling a strange chill wash over me. As I traced the symbols with my fingers, a sudden sound froze me in place, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, right behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight wildly, but there was nothing there. The whispering stopped. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, a product of the tension and fear. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I moved deeper into the room, my heart thudding loudly in my chest. That's when I noticed a door at the back, a heavy, iron door, unlike the wooden one I'd just opened. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from the crack. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. Inside was a narrow corridor, lined with more of those strange symbols. The air was colder here, and the light source was a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. I took a step forward, then another. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. Panic surged through me. I ran to the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock had clicked back into place on its own. I was trapped. For a moment, I was frozen, alone in the dark corridor, the eerie silence pressing in on me. Then, the whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around me like a cold wind. I raised my flashlight, trying to see where the voices were coming from, but all I saw were shadows dancing along the walls. That's when I noticed something else, movement in the shadows. Flickers of shapes that weren't quite human, shapes that seemed to watch me from the darkness. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing hollowly. No answer. The whispers grew louder, but now I could make out words, broken phrases, warnings. "Leave, before, too late." My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out to see a new message, "You shouldn't have come." I dropped the phone, and it skidded across the floor, the screen cracking on impact. The whispers turned into guttural sounds, almost growls, echoing from all around. My heart pounded like a drum. I backed against the wall, searching desperately for an exit. Then, the corridor's light flickered and went out, plunging me into total darkness. I fumbled with my flashlight, but the batteries died. In the pitch black, the sounds came closer, breathing, footsteps, the scrape of claws on concrete. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel the presence closing in. I forced myself to run toward a faint glow at the far end of the corridor, a crack where the door was letting in a sliver of light. I reached the door and slammed my shoulder against it. It gave way just enough for me to squeeze through. Once outside, the heavy door slammed shut behind me again, the lock snapping into place. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. That's when I realized, the door wasn't just a door. It was a barrier. A barrier between this world and something else. Something that should never have been unlocked. After that night, nothing felt the same. I thought that once I escaped that locked corridor, the nightmare would be over. But it was just the beginning. The moment the door slammed behind me, I felt like something had shifted, like I'd broken a fragile seal. Ever since, strange things have been happening in the office, and in my life. The first time I noticed it, I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to that dark corridor and the whispers. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a few seconds. When they came back on, the air felt heavier, colder, like an invisible weight pressing down. And then, I heard it. A soft tapping, like fingernails on wood, coming from the direction of that locked door. I froze. The sound stopped the moment I looked up, but the feeling of being watched didn't. That night, I stayed late again, trying to understand what was happening. The office was silent except for the low hum of the HVAC system. But near that door, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. I swear I saw something, a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, but no one was there. From then on, every time I approached that door, I felt a cold draft seep through the cracks around the frame, even though the building was heated. One evening, I caught a faint scent, something metallic mixed with decay, wafting from under the door. It was sickly sweet and made my stomach turn. I tried to ignore it, but the smell followed me for days, appearing randomly, always near that door. Sleep became impossible. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, drenched in sweat. Sometimes, I'd hear whispers again, soft, urgent, pleading. They called my name, but when I turned on the lights, the room was empty. One night, the whispers turned into screams, low, guttural, echoing through the walls. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head. The next day, I found strange scratches on my arms, thin, shallow marks that hadn't been there before. I showed them to a doctor, but they said it was probably from scratching in my sleep, caused by stress. But I knew it was more. I wasn't just stressed. Something was reaching out to me from that locked room. Then came the shadows. At first, they were just flickers, like passing reflections or tricks of the light. But soon, they took form. Dark shapes that lurked at the edges of my vision, disappearing whenever I tried to look directly at them. Sometimes, they'd appear in the corner of a room, just standing there, silent, watching. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the fear was real. One night, while working late, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate steps. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped when I stopped moving. It was like something was stalking me. I wasn't safe anywhere, not at work, not at home. And then, the nightmares started. Not the usual kind where you forget everything by morning. These dreams were vivid, almost like memories. I saw faces, twisted, pale, with hollow eyes. They reached out to me, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I woke up screaming more than once. The line between dreams and reality blurred. I began questioning my sanity. But I wasn't alone. One evening, as I sat near the locked door, trying to calm my racing mind, I heard a soft voice whisper, "Help us." I froze. "Help us," it repeated, closer this time. I whispered back, "Who are you?" The silence was deafening. Then, a sudden chill swept through the room, and the door rattled as if something was banging from the inside. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The locked door wasn't just hiding something dark, it was trapping something. Something desperate. Something dangerous. From that moment, I knew I had to find a way to close this chapter, to seal that door forever. But every attempt to move past it brought more questions, more fear. What was locked behind that door? What was trying to get out? And most terrifying of all, was I next? After everything I've been through, it's hard to say what's real anymore. That locked door wasn't just an old, forgotten part of the office. It was a gateway, a boundary between this world and something much darker. I tried to ignore it, to pretend nothing was happening. But the more I resisted, the stronger the presence became. It was as if by opening that door, I had invited something in. I spent nights researching ways to seal or protect myself from whatever was behind that door. Old rituals, protective symbols, anything I could find to push back the darkness. But nothing worked. The door remained. The whispers didn't stop. And the shadows never left. Sometimes, when I sit alone in the office after hours, I still hear faint voices begging for help. I don't know who they are or what happened to them, but I feel their pain. I don't know if I can ever truly escape what I unlocked. What I do know is this: some doors are meant to stay closed. Some secrets are better left forgotten. If you ever find yourself staring at a locked door you don't recognize, don't ignore it. Don't brush it off as nothing. Because you never know what might be waiting on the other side. I've learned that the hard way. This is my story. The story of the locked door in my new office, and everything that followed after I opened it.